Why does man create? Since the beginning of our brief existence on this earth, man has strived to express himself through art. From the paintings that span the interior caverns of the Paleolithic era, to the brilliant canvases and carvings of the old masters, the works of this struggle are everywhere. Picasso once said that art is a lie that makes us realize the truth. It invokes emotion, provokes thought, and most of all, can challenge the way we perceive the world around us. Truths that to us can alter everything we believe just through a simple viewing. But what you see is nothing more than an illusion. Inside the frame of a painting, there is no window into a landscape of old, with castles and mountains standing mighty against a cloudy sky. There's only a canvas with carefully selected pigments and shades. There is no figure lying repose in the statue garden, only marble and earth, cleverly sculpted into human form. But how it makes you feel, how it affects you, is entirely different, entirely real. Just be careful as to what it is that's trying to reach inside you.
If an artist pours their blood, sweat, and tears into a piece, the result can have a lasting effect on all those who view it. Then is it not so that by channeling that much energy and soul into a work, the artist attempts to breathe life into an object? But suppose they do that enough. Eventually that work can take on a life of its own. Like the ghost wandering the halls of a place it once called home, or the dark energy that permeates the scene of a tragedy long after it's past, something can live on. In this instance, we're referring to the world of paintings. Oftentimes an artist's expert technique and presentation can mask the true nature of the subject matter. While the image may seem innocent enough, we're talking about works that contain an emotional energy that not just affects us visually, but also harbors something sinister. Let us now take a look at just 4 of some of the world's most haunted paintings. Our first story brings us back to 1985 in the United Kingdom, where a raging fire had taken the home of a couple who barely escaped with their lives. The flames had consumed all, but most curiously, there had remained a painting amongst the ashes, seemingly unscathed by the inferno. Local authorities had been quick to determine the cause of the incident, as these types of fires were an unfortunately recurring issue for the time. What made this a strange event, however, was the couple stressed this was no ordinary fire. It was a curse placed upon them by the very painting that survived. In fact, their story would go on to be published by the tabloid paper The Sun with the title, The Blazing Curse of the Crying Boy. The Crying Boy is one of a series of paintings depicting crying children by Italian artist Bruno Amadio, also known as Giovanni Bregolin. Throughout the 1950s, Bregolin is said by some sources to have painted up to and over 1,000 different children, and from this, many myths and legends would arise, such as he would force the children to cry by hurting them or taking away things they loved. Some say he specifically focused on war-ravaged orphans, and finally that after he had painted them, their orphanages would burn to the ground. Another prevailing story is that the children were of gypsy origin, hence where the curse may come from. As cruel and apt as these stories may sound when in regards to a ghost story, nothing could be further from the truth. Bregolin was a kind man and treated the children, whom all came from normal places and backgrounds, wonderfully, and his series of paintings would gain worldwide popularity. That is until the mid-1980s. Once this story had been published, a local firefighter had come forward, astonished at what he had read. He recounted his own experiences entering the blackened and ruined remains of homes. Amongst the debris, if anything had survived at all, he would seemingly always find a nearly untouched painting. the crying boy. Indeed, well over 10 instances in which he could remember all yielded the same finding, and many more were to come. Some records state well over 50 cases. It had seemed now that with every fire that occurred, the crying boy would remain, and its curse began to spread into the minds and hearts of the public, and hysteria followed. Eventually, mass bonfires were held and sponsored by the Sun, appropriately on Halloween, where thousands of copies of the painting were burned, and so ended the panic. Many explanations have been put forth as to how the painting could have survived consistently through so many blazes, but none have ever really dispelled the curse. Our next story brings us to the year 2000, when a strange and unusual item had appeared for sale on the popular e-commerce website, eBay. Supposedly, a family had discovered a painting among the debris and old furnishings of an abandoned brewery. They claimed they were instantly captivated by it and felt they needed to bring the work into their home. All had seemed innocent enough until their youngest child began complaining of nightmares and frightening encounters, stating the children in the painting would move and sometimes even crawl out of the frame and be seen throughout the house. Soon after, the entire family began experiencing the same terrifying occurrences, hence their auctioning it off to another owner, but not without a full disclosure of what they had experienced. Once the listing had been viewed by a massive number of the public, people began claiming they too were affected by the painting, suffering bouts of nausea, insomnia, and other sorts of physical ailments. Others told of hearing disembodied voices, amongst other things. But where did this work come from? The Hands Resist Him, now commonly referred to as the eBay Haunted Painting, was created by surreal artist Bill Stoneham in 1972. In a deadline crunch and needing to produce something, he used a poem of the same title as inspiration and created what would be his most infamous piece. The painting was displayed in an exhibition in 1974, and three of the closest individuals to the work all died not long after. Charles Feingarten, the gallery owner who hosted the event and commissioned the work, died in 1981. Henry Seldis, an LA-based art critic who wrote about the event and the work, died in 1978. And finally, actor John Marley, who purchased the painting, died in 1984. After that, it somehow vanished until it was discovered nearly 30 years later in that abandoned place. It was eventually purchased and resides today in the Storage of Perception Gallery in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and is seldom viewed by anyone, save for only a few recent requests. We return now to the United Kingdom for a very recent and very frightening tale. A man by the name of Sean Robinson had discovered a very unnerving painting stored in the dust-covered attic of his grandmother's house. Upon his inquiry, he was told she received it as a gift from a friend and had stored it away not just because of its unusual appearance, but because of the frightening and sinister activity that would occur wherever it was present. As if the subject matter wasn't grim enough, a seemingly flayed man crying out in pain, according to Robinson's grandmother, the original artist, whose name remains unknown, had killed themselves after its completion. And what's worse, he had supposedly mixed his own blood into the paint. And so it had remained in the attic, from an unknown origin and away from human eyes for 25 years. Until Robinson had taken the painting home. Known only as the Anguished Man, and like many tales of the preternatural, the events had started slowly. Robinson had hung the painting in his home, unfazed by his grandmother's stories. It was only a short time later that he and his family began hearing odd sounds throughout the house, witnessed unusual pet activity, and felt an overall sense of unease around the painting. But the longer it had stayed on the wall, the heavier the presence around it had become. Soon, Robinson reported hearing sobs and moans coming from the room where it hung, and other strange scratching and tearing noises. What's more frightening is how these sounds eventually began to move throughout the house, and then the visual apparitions came. Shadow figures lurking throughout their home at night, his wife encountering an unidentified stranger in their kitchen who vanished immediately after they had made eye contact, and the sobs and moans grew louder and louder. Eventually, the painting was locked away in storage after Robinson's son was forcefully thrown down a staircase by an unseen entity, and the activity had seemingly vanished. Numerous paranormal investigations into the painting have been conducted, and most seem to agree there is indeed something rather interesting occurring. Others say the painting has attracted or even captured the spirit of something much darker, something evil, and it's trying to get out. Our last story stays true in spirit to the overall subject matter we've thus described: death, despair, and darkness. In the gallery of the Royal Holloway, University of London, there hangs a painting which starkly contrasts itself against the others. While many works depict beauty, thought-provoking images, and typical artistry, this depicts a chilling scene of nature's unyielding brutality. And what's worse is they say that if you stare long enough, it can drive you insane. Man proposes, God disposes. One of the latest works of famed wildlife artist Edwin Landseer, painted in 1864. While much darker than his normal works, with the polar bears tearing at human remains, the subject matter itself is a tale even more bone-chilling. The lost expedition of Sir John Franklin in 1845, an attempt by the English Navy to find the Northwest Passage, a route through the Arctic Ocean linking the Atlantic and the Pacific. They ended up trapped in the ice and ultimately disappeared. What remains were found led to evidence of cannibalism and other horrors. The painting was purchased in 1881 by philanthropist Thomas Holloway, who would go on to hang the work in the gallery where it resides today. Upon his death, it was found that Holloway was keenly interested in the mystery of the expedition and needed the painting, paying an exorbitant price for it. The artist, Landseer, would end up going mad 8 years after its completion. As such, many believe the work is cursed, harboring all of the terror associated with its inspiration. Today, it is routinely covered with a flag when the gallery is in use, and even so, many people still refuse to be within a close proximity of it.
While the world of visual art may be able to haunt and entrance us, what of the other forms of creative expression? What about the world of music? What the eye perceives may be able to stimulate the mind, but music can physically affect the body and influence the world around us. It can aid in the growth and flourishing of plants, and it can help to alleviate the stresses of modern life. But with that power comes the question we've been asking all along: can it carry something else in its waves?
One of the most lasting of legends in the world of music is the infamous curse of the Ninth Symphony, a belief that a composer would die during the creation of or after the completion of their Ninth Symphony. While it may seem rather far-fetched, it was indeed taken very seriously by many, considering the trend that was seen. After all, Ludwig van Beethoven, Gustav Mahler, Antonin Dvorak are just a few names whose deaths helped to solidify belief in the curse. But there is one piece of music in particular that brings us back to Hungary in 1933, where a man was heartbroken, alone, felt the weight of the world around him, and watched his civilization burned. Devastated by the sins of mankind and the wars and death that followed him, this man poured these feelings into his music and aptly titled his piece, "The World is Ending." The man was Reso Seres, a talented Hungarian pianist who struggled to find his way as a musician until he had wrote this song. His friend and poet, Laszlo Javor, was moved by the work and came up with his own lyrics for the song, and they would become solidified as the version that would carry on across the world, speaking of heartbreak and loss, and with a new title, Gloomy Sunday. Seres labored to get the song recorded or published, but almost no one was willing to help him, as they felt the song too sad or unusual. The song eventually made its way to America and was recorded many times over by various artists, but would ultimately become renowned due to jazz singer Billie Holiday's cover in 1941. While the music's subject matter is dark enough, what's more unusual about this piece is its uncanny ability to be linked to numerous suicides throughout history, several deaths from falling, drowning, hanging, and self-inflicted gunshot wounds all share a common factor: Gloomy Sunday. Whether it's their cold, lifeless hands clutching a sheet of paper with the lyrics, or having the music playing at the scene of their departure, well over 20 such deaths have been recorded, though many believe it to be far more. Regardless, Gloomy Sunday would go on to earn the nickname the Hungarian Suicide Song, and was even banned from many radio stations during its prime in the 1940s. And of course, as many may have been wondering, Seres took his own life in 1968.
There is indeed a power which permeates the world of art and resonates with us on a deep human level. And should an artist pour their despair into a work, well then perhaps it might affect us more than we think. like a curse of ancient lore? Is it possible for an object or work to be imbued with such power? We may never know. And though we've discussed several examples here, there are far more out there in the world. Some have yet to be discovered or have their influence measured. I'm your host, Adrian Ladelia, and this is Insomnia.